Hello and welcome to our keynote speaker for the Maynard Sudman Littleton Coin Company lecture series. When we decided to look for a keynote speaker, when the topic was American numismatic history, there was one person we could come up with, and really only one person that would fill the bill for this inaugural edition. It's fairly uncommon when you look industry-wide and you mention one person's name that almost everyone in the industry knows who that is. It's even rarer if you mention a person's last name only and people know who that is. Very rarely will you ever be able to mention somebody's first initial and everyone in the hobby will know who it is. It is my sincere pleasure to introduce to you Q. David Bowers, who is going to talk about great collectors and their collections. Dave?
Thank you. I don't quite know what keynote speaker means, whether I'm supposed to nominate somebody for president of the ANA next year or whatever. Coming in, I had a slight distraction, a nice way. Bob Evans, raise your hand back there. Bob is the discoverer of the Central America, so this is not my great collection thing, but he's sort of like Neil Armstrong is to space exploration. I mean, he's one of a kind. He discovered the treasures. If you're all interested in the Central America treasure, go up and shake Bob's hand afterwards. And then also at 3 o'clock on Saturday, he's going to be giving his Ship of Gold presentation. Now, about the year 2000, I keep forgetting, in Philadelphia, there was a numismatic theater with the Ship of Gold, which you'll see. And I was introducing Bob or saying some numismatic words, but it's really Bob's show. And the numismatic theater was like 400, 500 people, wall to wall, a huge room. They've never seen anything like it. And today, I think it stands as the best attended thing. Okay, great collectors and their collection. This is sort of like, will you give a talk on American history or something? My opportunities are endless, and there's nothing, I would never run out of material. The reason is because dealers are also collectors, so I could talk about dealers too. Like Henry Chapman collected things. B-Max Mehl once collected Liberty Head nickels, and he also collected territorial coins. So it includes everybody. So I'll talk about B-Max Mehl to start with, and this is a random collection of reminiscences. But things do change, and just last week we lost Art Kagan, who was probably what we'd call the Dean of American, Dean being the oldest practicing person of professional numismatists. He's been in the game since 1933. And someday people will say, hey, did you ever know Art Kagan? John Ford died like the week before or 2 weeks before. So there have been some interesting losses of very important people. But I came in the cusp of B-Max Mehl, and those of you who have ever heard of B-Max Mehl, he was down in Fort Worth, Texas, born in 1884 in Russia, came to the United States as an immigrant, was a coin dealer by 1900, and by the 1950s, he celebrated his 50 years of being in business in 1950. He had handled just about everything, and he was a showman. He loved coins. He wasn't a serious numismatist, but he loved coins, liked to talk about coins, liked to coin stories. And then he really was two people, like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde isn't correct in terms of psychology, but one part of him, and his main part, was he was selling catalogs for $1 a piece, Starware Coin Encyclopedia, to families with the idea during the Depression that if you found an 1894 dime with a little S on the back, you could pay off the deed to the ranch or send Junior to college. They had little cartoon strips like this. Max Mehl also had a radio program where he talked about coins, and the idea was you could find a treasure in your pocket change. And he did find some treasures too over a period of years, but mostly these were illusions, because nobody's going to find a silver dollar of 1804 in pocket change or 1913 nickel. But anyway, along the way, he sold catalogs. He also introduced a lot of people into coin collecting. At the same time, he had a serious side, his other persona, where he befriended major collectors like Waldo Newcomer and E.H.R. Green, and William Cutler Atwater, some of the big names who then sold them their collections, or he auctioned their collections. And so he's well known on a couple counts. But anyway, when I started coins in 1952 and became a dealer in quotes in 1953 in a small way, I didn't have a heck of a lot of money. And the one thing I did have was a consuming desire for knowledge. I just loved printed information. So I set about getting all the issues of the numismatist I could find, which were back to 1894 or 1893. The other ones I never did get in original form. All the issues of the Scrapbook magazine, and I actually read them. I don't mean I read every word, but I skimmed them. And Max Mehl, I watched him run his first ad in 1903, and then watched him just develop. Every month he had a new message. And so he sort of became my hero. Max Mehl wasn't everybody's hero. Some people thought he was exploitative. Other people, competitors, of course, don't like other competitors. But to me, he sort of represented the coin hobby, coin dealership as it was in the early 20th century. So one day in 1954 or 55, I got in his mailing list. He used to put out little catalogs of things for sale about 3 or 4 inches wide and this high. And he had some 1909 Indian cents. And they were like uncirculated. They didn't have MS-60, 65 or anything. They were like, bring it uncirculated, $10, okay? So I call up the Star Rare Coin Company or whatever name he was using, and I call up and I said, I'd like to, this is David Bowers calling from 40 Fort, Pennsylvania, which is where I lived, and I'd like to order a coin, and I'd sort of been a fan of Mr. Mehl. I might have pronounced it Mehl. He really pronounced it Mehl, but I didn't know that at the time. Mr. Mehl's for a long time. I've read a lot of his things. And he said, well, he's mentioned your name. Just a minute. And the guy goes, hello, is this Dave? Hi. Who am I speaking? I think I was having clerk number 143. He said, well, no, this is Max. And he said, I'm Dave Bowers. I said, well, I know all about you. He said, I read all your ads. And he said, you remind me of me when I was a kid. You're doing a good job. So that was sort of like praise from on high. And I said, well, actually, and I didn't quite know what to do, like a cat before Queen Victoria or something. And so I wasn't glib particularly. And I said, well, it's very, very nice to talk to you or something. But I really called about an order. And I said, I see you have a 1909 Indian cent brand uncirculated for $10 in your catalog. And he said, well, they're worth more than that now. The market's rising. They're worth like $25. But he said, and I know that, and you know that, and just to let you know, I do know that, but you can have one for $10. So a little later, at one of the A&A conventions, and it was either 1955 or 56 because he died in 57, or it could have been 57, Abe Kossoff, who was a dealer, some of you may have known, I wound up selling his estate, said that Max Mehl, he was going to have dinner with Max Mehl, it was a tradition, and that Abe Kossoff liked me. I was a little kid at the time, and Max Mehl mentioned me. Would I come along? So I came along with Molly Kossoff, that's Abe's wife, and Abe and Max Mehl. And we had a very nice dinner. This was, in some nice restaurant, and with the 4 of us, and we went in at like 6, and there was no hurry. It was just chat, and so I started asking Max Mehl questions. For better or worse, I tend to remember a lot of what I would read. So I said, well, you said this and this, and back in 1911, oh yes. Or what was Walter Newcomer like, or something, and all these questions. And then I said, well, you should write your biography. And then he said, well, no, why don't you write it for me? This was a great, here I'm a high school kid, So anyway, when he died in 1957, he was one of a kind, but it was sort of fun because I just met him by chance, and he was very warm and friendly to me, and he was sort of like a childhood hero. Max Mehl was a slight of stature. He was maybe this high, and I doubt if he crossed the 100-pound mark very much. And when he shook hands, he had like a very limp hand. If you shake hands, sometimes people have like a wrench-type hand. Well, it was sort of like a little cottony hand. It was sort of funny when you shake his hand. You expect to dynamic, but just something you remember the weirdest things. But anyway, that's Max Mehl, and Max comes through as a collector, so he does qualify. Another oldie but goodie was Mrs. Norweb. Emery May Holden Norweb, as some of you may know, was born, I believe, I'm trying to think, 1896 or some such time. And when she was a kid, her father had her take Crosby's book, 1875, and attribute when she was a kid, like 9, 10 years old. You look these up in Crosby, Albert Fairchild Holden, this was her father. You look this up in Crosby and put Crosby's numbers on. So here's a little girl like 8 or 9 years old, and at her father's side in the study, and the father says, look up these Massachusetts things, and look in this book, and then this is number 2A or whatever it happened to be. And she did this, okay? Albert Fairchild Holden died in 1908. He was a graduate of Harvard in the class of 88, I think, gave them $500,000. This is 1908. And if you go into the Harvard Mineralogical Museum, you'll see his plaque on the wall. Well, giving $500,000 in 1908 is probably like giving, should I say, $80 million today or whatever it is. But the money was put to good use, and today the Norweb, the Holden estate in Harvard is worth like in the low 20 millions of dollars, like 20, 30 million dollars of what's left, and they paid expenses all over the years. Anyway, the tradition lives on. The father died in, I think, 1913. Emery May Holden was a teenager, and I guess was very, very close to her father. She must have been. And I think after he died, the memories of her father were like colonial coins, looking at grades of coins, looking through auction catalogs, and saying, okay, should we bid on this? And the father would say, well, we have the Wilson sale. I think that's an actual example. And maybe 1907, and we're going to bid on this, and here's what we need. Why don't you look through the catalog and put a little pencil check on something you think we need for the Holden collection? And she would do this. So then when he died, she was a very advanced lady. She mentally or psychologically, she's very independent. And her father died, and then during World War I, she fell in love with a guy named Henry Norweb, who was from a well-to-do family, but somehow or other it was too fast, too soon, or whatever it was. But the family, and all this comes from her, the family didn't like the idea of her rushing off to Mr. Norweb. So what she did is she left the United States and joined the ambulance corps in France, and then I guess met up with Henry, who had a hotel suite in Paris or something. And anyway, romance blossomed and they got married, and they lived happily ever after. But Mrs. Norweb grew to become maybe an icon in terms of being a collector. She formed one of the greatest collections ever, picking up the traces of her father's collection and adding to it very, very carefully. And she had they never really kept track of what they had. Mike Hodder isn't here, is he? No, okay. Mike helped me when we did the estate. But we went into the estate, and I'm getting ahead a little bit here, and we looked through some different things, and they had no records or anything. And I remember we looked in an envelope, and it said like 19720, and I remember saying, hey, this is an extremely high relief. Oh, it is. This is like $1 million coin today. But when I was a little kid, Mrs. Norweb, one nice thing about numismatics is that numismatists are always nice to little kids, and I hope this is true today of any of you in the room. Just yesterday or the day before, I was over at Tom Denley's table, and there was a 13-year-old person. Are you here now? No? Okay. So many things to do in so little time. But he decided to become a coin dealer. He's 13, and anyway, I said, go over to the Whitman table, and anything I write, you can have a discount on. I don't own Whitman, but they can give a discount. But he was so pleased. And he said everybody was just so nice to him. And when I was a little kid, everybody was nice to me. But then and now in coins, I've always tried to say, well, if I'm going to say something in coins, like I'm going to sell a coin, I would first of all be as accurate as I could. I would, never say anything wrong because I don't remember what I said then. And secondly, I would describe it as if I were buying it. I wouldn't say everything's a gem because it isn't. I mean, I might say, hey, this 1916 quarter is scratched on the obverse, but on the other hand, it's only $75, so it's a good filler if you want to fill or buy it. But I found that people like that. But one reason or another, Mrs. Norweb happened to like me, and she liked Ken Rendell, who was a young collector friend of mine at the same time. So Mrs. Norweb was besieged. If you went to a convention, Mrs. Norweb would wear a fur coat. She'd come down the aisle, and you would think that the President of the United States was coming down. Dealers would sit up at their tables. They would look with bright eyes at Mrs. Norweb, like, you stop here. Maybe a couple would run up and try to intercept her. But anyway, she always liked me, so I was sort of a pal of hers and was invited to her home and things like this. And she just liked me as a person, which was real neat for a little kid. And when I bought my 1894 S dime for $4,750 in 1957, they bought it from me for $6,000, and they bought that rarity. And then when Mrs. Norweb died, the family just said, "Hey, come and get the collection." We didn't even negotiate. We didn't even. They didn't even ask, what to do. They just said, "Come and get it." But Mrs. Norweb had a place in Booth Bay Harbor, Maine. She had a townhouse in New York City, and she had a place on Lake Erie in Cleveland, a place called Bratenahl. And she was a very interesting person, and she was what we call a control freak, which I probably am too. You have to know what's going on and who's doing it. So with her kids, she had 3 kids. The kids that she would have them report, and these are when Mrs. Norweb is 75 and the kids are 50. She wanted a report from them every day on their activities. And everybody had her time, and I'm not making this up. Like maybe Albert was to call at 7:18 in the morning, and R. Henry Jr. at 7:23, and they all had their times. And up in their place in Booth Bay Harbor, Maine, which is really gorgeous, it's seaside. It's not elegant, but it's a nice prospect. There's a big living room rug, I don't know, a quarter the size of this room. And she had a lot of grandchildren. So true to Mrs. Norweb, the room was divided off, with invisible lines, like, you can be in this corner, you can be in this corner, you can do this, and all the kids had rules. They also had some interesting rules of engagement. One is that if you invite people to your house, you should have a guest house, which they had, so that you don't get tired of them, and then you can just go to bed and they can stay up. Number 2 is that they were in the ambassadorial service. You never say, the Norweb family gave a picnic for our staff afterwards. Said, "Hey, we want to give a picnic over in Booth Bay. Come over and bring all your staff." So I got up, and Mr. Norweb Jr. Said, a little bit of presentation, and I got up and I said, "Well, I really want to thank you for having us all out here." And Mr. Norweb said, cuts me off. Said, "Well, but first of all, if anything I learned having my parents in the ambassador service is you don't say thank yous for thank yous. I'm thanking you. You're not thanking me." I said, "Well, anyway, but before I sit down, thank you." We had lobsters and everything. But Mrs. Norweb in the ambassador service, they were posted in several different places. They had a rule, and you have to have rules if you're an ambassador. They had a reception every day in the embassy at 4 p.m. So if somebody came in and said, "Look, I'm a very important person from Portland, Oregon," the attendees would say, "Well, come by at 4 o'clock." And then the Norwebs had their own schedule at 4 o'clock. They would be there. They would fraternize, they would serve tea or something, and then they would go have their private lives. But she was very much in organizing things. One of her little dalliances, along with her husband, was they had their collection in the Huntington Bank, which was in Cleveland, in the bottom level. And some of you have been to the banks. The Lathrop Collection Bank is similar. These are these old banks in cities that the safe deposit room is the size of the ground floor, and they have rooms and doors and vaults and everything. So they had the Norwebs had this and the Norwebs had this collection down there, and they also were well known locally. They owned the Cleveland Plain Dealer and a whole bunch of different stuff, mining properties, and you name it. But anyway, Mrs. Norweb would come down and they want to see our collection. We want to visit our collection. They'd go into a conference room, which if you were to see it today, you'd say, well, it was nice once. I mean, marble floors, but furniture that's miscellaneous bank furniture. They would close the door and they said, we're going to lock the door because we'll have some of our coins. But Mrs. Norweb said, what we do is we pack a picnic lunch and a bottle of wine. And we'd sometimes sit there and read books for an hour or two, and then we might look at a coin and then we'd leave, but we never told the bank that. But Mrs. Norweb, also in dealing with Mrs. Norweb, if you offered her something, if you said Mrs. Norweb, you couldn't call her anything but Mrs. Norweb. You just couldn't do that. She in fact, she never said to say anything. She never said, call me Emery May or anything. But if I offered, and this is early on, I said, Mrs. Norweb, I have a coin that's on your list. You're collecting proof half cents, which she actually did by first and second restrike varieties. The first person I said, I just found one that I think you would like, and it's $300, and she'd look at it and say, well, I'm not quite sure that it's quite the quality, but maybe I had an approval. You look at it, But I said, well, maybe I could do a little better than $300. I'll check. So she'd say, Dave, she'd call me Dave. Dave, if I wanted to buy it, I'd pay $300 for it. I don't want to buy it. Oh, okay. and she was that way. And she had run-ins with people. If your name is Norweb, you have people take advantage of you occasionally. And one of her deals that she told me about, she was in the American contingent to the fruit collection in February, March 1954. And King Farouk had been deposed, and they were selling the palace collection, and this is just from her, because I obviously wasn't there. And they were selling the palace collection, and everything was put in miscellaneous lots. And one lot said, Collection of United States Nickels from 1866 to 1950, okay, in little Raymond boards. But there's a 1913 in it. I don't think it was even mentioned in the catalog. So so she was able to, by diplomatic connections or something, have that removed from the lot and sold separately. And they put a little, whatever the lot number was, they put a little A after it and sold it at Mr. Lee, his real name was Mr. Levy, was the auctioneer, and he agreed to pull that nickel out and sell it. Well, Mrs. Norweb didn't want to bid on it because if Mrs. Norweb's bidding on it, then maybe somebody else would say, well, if Mrs. Norweb wants to buy that, I'll pay more. So Abe Kossoff and Saul Kaplan were sort of partners, and they were dealers sitting in that side of the room. So she said, buy this for me, okay? This is all by prearrangement. She had made it a separate lot. So they bought it, okay? Well, sometimes people try to be a little chintzy with Mrs. Norweb. So what happened is they bought the 1913 nickel for whatever price it was. I'm making this up, $3,500, whatever it was, but in something like that in Egyptian pounds. And Mrs. Norweb goes over to Saul Kaplan and says, well, thank you. And Saul says, well, there's a complication, First of all, you got it for much less than you said, but that's not the complication. The complication is that I got a wire from another client in the United States since I talked to you. I haven't talked to you since this morning, and he said buy it at any price, so I can't really sell it to you at the price I paid. Well, anyway, she never she got the coin. She never spoke to Saul Kaplan again for the rest of her life. Louis Eliasberg had things like this where someone just tried to cut a little corner. But anyway, she was fun to know. And when I did a book on Virgil Brand, I tried to find somebody who had met Virgil Brand in person. Virgil Brand died in 1926. And I called up Mrs. Norweb and I asked if she had met Virgil Brand. Oh yes, I've been to visit him in Elston Street and over his brewery. And I said, well, can you give me a little information on Virgil Brand? And she was the only person I talked to who ever had met Virgil Brand. After she died, Mrs. Norweb was blind in the last few years of her life. After she died, her husband, Ambassador R. Henry Norweb Jr., who became president of the American Numismatic Society, liked me, and he took me to a couple of New York Coin Club meetings. If you've ever been to a New York Coin Club meeting, at least going back 30 years, they're not commercial. You know, they're very like a bunch of scholars sitting around, and they would have a coin of the week or a coin of the month. You know, this subject is eagles, and bring in coins with an eagle and pass them around. But it was quite unlike any other coin club meeting because, you know, everybody there was like a serious, you know, they could talk coins, and that was fun. Is David Calhoun here? No, okay, then I won't talk about Harry Bass. He is Harry's son-in-law. Well, I'll talk a little bit about Harry. Harry, there are so many collectors in so little time. Harry Bass, some of you must know, he was in our own time. He started out collecting when he heard that rolls of nickels had gone up in value, and he got some from his bank. Rolls of quarters. I'm sorry, Washington quarters. But Harry was a very dynamic person business-wise. He controlled Vail Associates, and then he personally built Beaver Creek, Colorado, if you've ever been out there. And the family was in the oil business. But Harry had lots of money. But Harry also was probably in the top several numismatic scholars I have ever met. You could talk die varieties or anything. You know, he just really knew his stuff. And he was, as a customer, just very, very interesting to talk with because, you know, you didn't sell him things. He bought things from you, and then he would tell me, he'd say, well, gosh, this is the earliest die dated this $1820 $5 gold piece, Breen number such and such, you know. And I would listen. You learn a lot from Harry. But Harry also had noblesse oblige, or whatever you want to call it. You know, he had the right to do what he wanted to and did it. And I remember one day he said he had discovered the internet, and I didn't even have a computer. And he said, well, you should go out and buy one. And I said, well, it's not part of our business. And he said, well, I'll tell you what. He said, I'm not writing you another letter in your life. You know, I only communicate by email. And this was like 15 years ago or something, whenever email first started. So I was very slow on getting a computer. So then he allowed that I could call him on the phone, but not many other people did. Anyway, to make a long story short, we wound up handling for his family much of his collection. And then his wife, Doris, said, would you like Harry's personal coin cabinet? And I didn't quite know to do that. I said, sure. So I have in storage a coin cabinet this wide, this high, with all these little pull-out drawers that Harry kept his collection in his library. So it's an heirloom, and I suppose the right place for that would be the American Numismatic Society or the American Numismatic Association. I mean, it's not an elegant cabinet, but I mean, here a collector of collectors used it for many, many years. Similarly, these little souvenirs, we handle a lot of the brand estate for the Morgan Guarantee Trust Company. And Norman Neubauer, who is the executor, said he liked what we did. And he said, I'd like to give you Virgil Brand's personal magnifying glass. I have this little magnifying glass that used to belong to Virgil Brand. I could talk about Amon Carter. Some of you may have known him. He was a currency person. And Amon Carter was in Fort Worth, Texas. He owned the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. His father, Amon Sr., was co-founder of American Airlines, and the Carter family was the largest stockholder. He was in Gulf Oil also. And anyway, Amon was what you'd call, if any of you knew him, a down-home person. He would come to convention in a loosely buttoned shirt, and his personal car was a Pontiac. And and he would never say, "I'm Amon Carter." He would, and also, like when I was a little kid once, he said, "You need an $1804 to attract attention to your table." He had an $1804, and I said, "Well, he had one of the good ones." And I said, "Well, that's true." He said, "Well, I'm going to give it to you on your table." I said, "Well, I don't have insurance." "Well, that's my problem. You put this on your table for the ANA convention," which I did. So for the whole convention, we had $1804 on our table. But he was that way. One of his things he did for a long time, and I remember I was in an elevator with him once, he said to somebody, some miscellaneous hotel guest, he said, have you ever seen a $10,000 bill to some lady who was checking in? And the lady said, no. Well, have you ever seen 7 of them? But he was a fun person and a neat guy. And I remember visiting him once in the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. His office was about the size of this room, and it was really cluttered. It was really, probably looks like my library, but there's stuff all over the place. And in one corner there are like 15 shovels for groundbreaking ceremonies. Okay, and I don't know if any of you people know about groundbreaking ceremonies, but I certainly don't. So I go in these shovels and I said, well, why does this shovel have 3 handles? I'm not kidding. One in the middle, one on the side. Well, that's so that like the mayor, the financier can all do it at once. And I never heard of such a thing, but he had a number of 3-handled shovels. And I remember once he said, go in my vault and browse around and help yourself and just make yourself at home. I remember doing that. And I had a great question answerer. And he had all these boxes from B. Max Mehl, and B. Max Mehl had all these sales. He had Dunham and Olson and Atwater and so forth. So you might have a box saying Atwater sale. And you look at it, all the envelopes are in there, like lots, 18, 27, and so forth. And I said, well, what are those? They're still in there from 30, 40 years earlier. Well, my father, whenever Max Mehl had a sale and something didn't get a bid or anything, he just sold it to my father. My father bought it. So he had all these what I call remnants, some great stuff, some not great stuff. Once I was in his office, and he said, excuse me, I have a phone call. I had placed this earlier. It's Art McKee, and Art McKee had a treasure museum somewhere on the Florida Keys. His name was McKee, M-C-K-E-E. And so he goes on and on and on for about a half hour, and I'm looking in the vault, and they said, okay, I'll do that. You can put me in for such and such. And he said, well, I've never been involved in deep-sea treasure exploration. And he wanted some money, so, what the heck? So he became an investor. It wasn't about $50,000. Amon was a prisoner of war. Some of you may have heard this in World War II, and kept in a German concentration camp or prisoner of war camp, and given like a 500-calorie diet per day or something. He was a teenager, I think, or in his early 20s, and there was a Polish girl who this was in Poland. Polish girl who was a slave labor, obviously, but she came and cleaned the place and served food or something, and she would slip Amon some food. She would bring food from her home and slip it to the prisoners. So after Amon got out, Amon got in touch with this person and said to this family in Poland, anything you want in this world, you ask. And for years afterward, he bestowed, I won't say luxuries, but wonderful things on this Polish family. Anyway, Amon was a fun person. I was with him in Las Vegas once, and he was an owner of the California Club, which is down near Binion's, before they had all these fancy things. And I remember going, and they collected silver dollars. The casinos, if you were in the casino business and you had to have cash, well, why not have S-mint silver dollars or something, which they did. So they had many bags of those. But I remember going up with him. They had what they called runways, I think they called them. But you go up and they're little like catwalks, and you look down on the dealers. And so I was up on the top of the California Club, crawling along with Amon, and say, well, we're over table 4, table 5, and so forth. And that was sort of fun. Amon started the Amon Carter Museum of Western Art, which still flourishes today. But I remember he started that, and just 2 more Amon stories. He said, I was with him one time, and I don't want to give the impression I wasn't with him nearly as much as someone like Johnny Rowe was, but I saw him quite a bit over the years. And he said, I've just hired an art curator to manage my little museum here in Fort Worth. And he said, my art curator is getting a little too important for his own good. He feels he has to call London every Monday morning to find out how the art market is. He said, I'm going to stop that. I guess he must have. 2 other little stories. One, he was the director of American Airlines, and this is Johnny Rowe telling me this. Once they went to the gate someplace, and they said, oh, the flight's out there in the runway, and Amon shows him his card, said, bring the flight back. So I guess the 747 comes back to the gate, picks up Amon, and then takes off again. Another one is one I heard from Amon directly, and American Airlines wanted to go in the hotel business. A number of airlines, they thought, well, if running an airline is a good idea, then when they get to the destination, it's good to own the hotel. And they owned the hotel in Times Square. I've forgotten the name of it, where the ANA convention was in 1976. But anyway, one day they bought this hotel along the 405 freeway in San Francisco. It was a multiple place, and I don't know how many millions of dollars they paid for it. And about 6 months later, they realized it was just a super dog. Like, it wasn't close enough to the LA airport for anyone to want to stay there to go on a flight. But once you left the LA airport, you're not going to want to stop there because it's not a destination. You want to wind up staying in LA or Beverly Hills or someplace. So it was betwixt and between. And Amon, I remember having dinner with him, and he said, we have this really doggy hotel that was eating up interest and everything else, but it's brand new hotel. It looks great, but nobody stays there. So next time I saw Amon says, one of the best deals I ever had. A group of people from Japan, they were interested in making investments in Los Angeles, and a real estate agent said, well, I think I think I might be able to buy a hotel. So they went by this. Well, I think I might be able to get it. So Amon, I guess, talked to the representative and said, well, I'm not sure. We've only owned it 6 months. And he said, well, we'll give you a profit. Well, let me talk with my board. Anyway, the hotel was sold at a nice profit. So that was one of his stories. What else should I say? What's my time doing? Okay. We had, some of you may have known, like Ed Trompeter, he's California. He was in technology business, and he had a little business card he carried with him that he was a janitor of his company. But Ed was a very proud man. He decided to collect proof gold, one of every proof coin from 1858 to 1915, from the gold dollar to the $20 gold piece. He wound up getting everything except the 1858 20. It was the only coin he ever got. And he was very, very particular about buying nice quality. He would not buy what we call a Proof 63 if a gem thing. He did take all of his coins. He had some sort of space-age solvent. To me, if you look at a $3 gold piece or double eagle from like 1875, they're nice, warm, yellow-orange. Well, he thought he dipped them all and made them all bright yellow, which I didn't think he should do. I don't think it hurt the coins any, but it removed the toning. But I guess he has the rights to do that. I'll mention Armand Champa. I see George Colby came in the room. George Colby, by all rights, was supposed to get the Armand Champa book collection, but somehow or other, and I don't know behind the scenes, this is George's memoirs. Armand called me up one day, or called somebody up and said, I want you to sell my book collection. And George can have his own version. Are you sticking your tongue out? No. And I said, well, I thought this was going to George Colby. Oh, no, there's been a change in arrangements. Well, will you do it? And I said, well, we're really not as up as George Colby is, but we can make arrangements. And I think he said, how about Charlie Davis? And Charlie's a very highly competent cataloger. So I made arrangements for Charles Davis to come in, and we had a highly successful series of sales. But that happens in professional numismatics. Very often a collection of coins, is promised to us, and then the heirs give it to brand X. I said, how could that happen? But it does, and you win some and lose some. But anyway, Armand was a very interesting collector. He owned 7 roller rinks in Kentucky, and here again I knew Armand for many, many years. When he collected patterns, his pattern collection came up for sale. This is pattern coins in 1972. All the dealers said, well, do you want to make an offer on my collection? Yes, I do. And everyone flew to Louisville, Kentucky. He set aside a month, 30 days, but I don't know how many business days, 22 business days, to see people in his vault. And And everybody said they would pay the highest price, and I don't know what the highest price he received was, but he called up one day and he said, I'm tired of this game. I don't think anybody's willing to pay anything. Will you auction it? So I agreed to do that. This is 1972. And then he actually ran ads in the different publications like Coin World and so forth. I want to thank Dave Bowers and Jim Ruddy for selling my collection for twice what I thought I'd get for it, which is sort of like an auctioneer's dream coming true. But Armand was he was a man, he liked the glitter and glitz. He was very proud that he had papered one room in his house with $4 million worth of little chits from casinos, little slips where you sign and then you lose your money, obviously, and then you pay back later. But he's very, very, very proud of this. But when he went to Las Vegas, and I'm sure this would happen today, if you go and you're well known, you're going to drop $300,000 in 3 days, there's nothing that you can't have in Las Vegas that they will give you. But one thing about Armand, he was a collector of numismatic literature, but he was the only collector, and I'll ask George to see if he knows of any others of significance, who never read his books. I mean, normally if you talk to someone like Frank Van Zandt or John Adams or anybody who's a collector of books, you say, oh my gosh, I got a Woodward so-and-so catalog from 1860 and it has printed or handwritten buyers and so forth, and it has a purple cover, and I've never seen one that. But Armand collected books like people would collect trophy coins, and I don't think he ever read any of them. Did he, George? Yes. On the other hand, we have John Ford, who just passed away. George is auctioning his collection. And John read his books, but John, it would be an interesting psychology study because John planted the crop I'm not talking about some of the controversial things John said, but John planted the crop for like numismatic research and things, collected things, but never lived to enjoy it. I mean, never unpacked his library, and John was always something like, well, I will do this someday, but someday never came. Probably a good object lesson in that you should savor the roses and one day at a time. One little thing before I conclude is I was once driving from San Francisco over to somewhere in Nevada. Anyway, I checked in wherever Harvey's Club is on the state line, and the room attendant, I gave him my credit card, might have been Diners Club or something, whatever they had, let's say in 1975. And he said, oh, hi, you're Dave Bowers. And I said, yeah. And he said, well, I'm on your mailing list, and I like your catalogs. And I shook his hand, and I said, what is your name? And met him. And he said, I've always wanted to be a coin dealer. And but I have early retirement at like age 62. And although this is a very fine casino, I just always wanted to be a coin dealer all my life. I could hardly wait, And I said, well, that's nice. I said, I written a little book on how to be a successful coin dealer, a little booklet for Coin World. I said, I'll send you one of these and send you some catalogs. And he gave away what people in Nevada can. He said, well, we're going to put you in the XYZ suite or something, this is for $99 a night, which is very nice, with 3 rooms or something. But anyway, I sent him the catalog and sent him the thing, and I got a little note back about a week later from his widow that so-and-so had died of a heart attack, a day. He mentioned his visit with you, and there's another thing where you should enjoy yourself. Take time. I'll tell one more collection, and I'm a little bit dangerous. One thing I hesitate to do is talk about great collections, because very often, as a writer in Coin World, and other places, people will say, I've read about each, $4, 1913 nickels and everything, and it's just out of my league. I can't collect, and I'll say something like, well, that's okay, but one of my favorite collections is like counter-stamped large cents. I've collected them since 1955. A real expensive one's $100. A lot of them are $50. They keep going up like everything. Our numismatic literature, you can buy a complete set of the Numismatic Scrapbook magazine, which in my opinion is much better than the Numismatist if you have to compare, from 1935 to 1976. Probably the market value is less than $1,000. And you could go on a desert island and spend 2 weeks and get so excited, so there's a lot of vistas. But I'll tell you, this is not a great collection, but it's a good concluding thing because collections don't have to be great, and I think that it's fun to collect things that are, well, actually, I see David Sudman, who's sponsoring this in the audience. I collect state quarters, okay? So I told Littleton Coin Company, I said to David, can you send me a complete set of state quarters, in an album, which he did, and I don't know what grade they're in. They're 64, 65, they're not run-of-the-mill, but they're nice quality. But I enjoy them. I read about the state quarters. This morning I went to the new nickel thing. I was talking to Miss Gloria Eskridge of the Mint, and she sends me information on new quarters and so forth. But here's all my my whole collection from David costs, and I'm making this up, $200, $300 in a nice album. The other day I said, David, you have to send me one from the past year because I don't have the proofs. But I did lay out from Rick Snow for a set of those Wisconsin extra leaf things at the fun convention. It's cost me more than the rest of my set. Where I get, but that's a fun situation because people say, well, they're completely worthless or nothing. But I think they're interesting. I think actually somebody at the Mint deliberately made those, like, hey, try to find me, I mean, I looked at them very carefully, and then someone said, well, you said you own them. That's why you say that. And I said, I don't think I'm influenced by having spent like $100. But anyway, my concluding thing is, and this is a great collection. It might be a great collection, but last year at the ANA convention, I was over at the American Numismatic Rarities table, and a guy came over and said, hi, I'm Daniel Carr, and I recognize his name. He said, I've designed the Colorado quarter, or excuse me, I'm from Colorado. I've designed the Rhode Island quarter, the Maine quarter, and so forth. And we talked, and then a lady came over and said, hi, I'm Mrs. Robin Wells from Texas, and I said, oh, I'd like you to meet Daniel Carr, he's so forth. And she said, oh, I like the state quarters. So we sat down at the table like we sometimes do. I see Mr. and Mrs. Smith in the audience back here, and we just sat down at the table for a half hour. We just sat down and talked about designing quarters, okay? And so I get home. I took a picture of Robin Wells and Mr. Carr, Daniel Carr, together. I get home, I get a nice letter from Robin Wells that she had bought like one each of my books from Whitman, or however many there were, and so forth, and just loved this, and so somehow or other I said, gosh, I'm writing a book now. If you like them so much, would you like to read the manuscript? She'd just been collecting for like 6 months, the second coin show. So anyway, I sent her a manuscript of what I was reading, so she wrote back and said, well, my son Joe, age 6, collects quarters and nickels from circulation. To make a long story short, she's proofread 2 or 3 of my things. Looking at it, I find that when I do a book, if I send out 6 copies for proofreading, I could have Walter Breen and George Colby proofread it, and then you would find something they missed. That's just the way it is. David Sudman has been a proofreader of my book, so she sends back with these things like, you lost me in this paragraph. Maybe you know what you're talking about. And so it's a reality check. And so this little, I've never met her son Joe, but Whitman Publishing Company was going to had a show in Atlanta the other day. And somehow for a book I was doing, she sent a picture of a little Joe, age 6, looking at an album, and I think the kids of the future. So Whitman said they had this, can we use this? So they put little Joe 6 on like a poster in the thing. So I got a little note from Rob and said, oh, this is really neat. My son really loves coins. So anyway, that's about it. It's 50 minutes, and thank you for having me. And the next, thank you. Lane, your question and answers? Yes. Yes.
David, these are famous collections, and like collections today, probably people didn't keep them at home. And I'm wondering, how do you think these famous collectors enjoyed their collections? Is there a trend throughout these famous collectors?
Well, Harry Bass kept stuff at the bank, and he kept stuff at home. Mrs. Norweb kept stuff in the bank. Louis Eliasberg kept stuff in the bank. I think one good thing you can do today, and I'm doing this myself, I collect paper money, and I collect tokens and everything, and I think now you can photograph these things. I mean, all my paper money collection, and David Sudman and I are both aficionados of New Hampshire notes. I scan them on an Epson scanner, total value of $300, $200, and I can bring a New Hampshire note up this big on my screen, and I really enjoy them in ways I could not have 20 or 30 years ago. So I suppose that you can enjoy them on images, and it's fun to maybe know that you own something. Sometimes it's fun that you own something. Like we live up in the resort area of New Hampshire, and very often people will come to me, and they'll live in Providence or New York City or Boston, you know, and they will say, I mean, they'll maybe live in New Jersey, and they'll have a let's say their initials are JS for John Smith. So they have a license, New Jersey license, JSNH. Well, they have a cottage in New Hampshire. Well, sometimes when you have something like a castle in Spain, you close your eyes and you say, well, gosh, you know, I have that in the bank. It gives you a feeling of security, you own it. But I think now with the digital system, there's a guy here named, there's a booth called PacSci for Pacific Science, and I went by there yesterday. They had a little camera outfit and microscope, you know, binocular microscope, and for $300, I gave him a check, and I said, send me one of these. But it's, you know, you can take close-up pictures of mint marks this big, you know, for $300 and plug into your computer. I have other things, but it seems to me a simple way of doing things. So I think you can enjoy them that way. I think if you keep them at home, it depends on what you collect. If you collect obsolete paper money of Vermont, you know, you could have the world's greatest collection that might not cross the $100,000 mark. Maybe keep it at home with appropriate insurance, and insurance is readily available. Don't tell everybody about it, or else keep it in the bank. But I think most people keep their valuable things in the bank. I'll tell you one interesting thing. We had what's called the Fairfield collection a number of years ago, and it was owned by a Wall Street trader, and his initials were HL. I won't mention his name. It was no one you'd recognize anyway. So out in California where I was at the time, he said, I want to sell my collection, and it's worth $3 million, $2 million, and it has a little bit of everything. And so this was, let's say, in 1975 or 6, you know. So that's probably like saying it's worth $20 or $30 million. So I said, okay, well, I'll come out, and I'll bring a group of people with me. And there were, is there anybody here from the old B&M? Okay. Gosh, I should have made all these announcements. So we went out there, flew out, and there were like 3 or 4 of us. We go to this person's house in Fairfield, Connecticut, and we find out that he has nothing but rarities. You know, he didn't have any common things. And the housekeeper greeted us and said, well, you're supposed to take everything there is. And so he said, well, under the to the left of the living room couch, under this little thing, pull out the little cabinet. There's some coins there. There's some here. There's some there. Everything was in the house. He was busy trading in Wall Street. Never did come to say hello. He had. So when I got back, and some of this stuff we just took. You know, I got back and I said to him on the phone. I said, you know, we have some unopened packages here. There's one here from Steve Ivey. We just opened it, and there's a bill here for like $16,000. Doesn't look like you paid it. And he said, oh, well, he said, how much is it? I'll send him a check. He never looked at the coins. So that's sort of like the Armand Champa school of literature collecting, you know. But and people do collect trophy coins now. It's very common for somebody now to come and say, I've always dreamed of owning a coiled hair Stella. You know, I'm going to buy one for your auction. Okay, sir, congratulations, $330,000. After the sale, I said, well, you know, now that I own it, can I put it in your next sale? And, you know, so it used to be 30 years ago, if you said, well, you're waiting for one, they said, well, the last time one of those came up was a great collection. But now, well, like the 1913 Liberty Nickel of Eliasburg that we sold, it's been changed hands 3 or 4 times in the past. It's now owned by Laurie Sperber, really nice coin. The unique 1870S halftime has been in and out of the market, you know, 4 or 5, 6 times. The 1873 cc without arrows dime, unique out of Eliasburg, which we sold in 1976, has been sold 3 or 4 or 5 times. So there's a much faster cycling rate. You know, in some ways this is okay. It's also a little bit like musical chairs. You know, normally if somebody buys a coin and holds it for a generation like Mrs. Norweb did, you don't really care about the market. Today, if something cycles fast, like Stella's or something, you know, you have to be sure there's some new players, so if the music stops, someone else will buy. But as long as, and that's not negative, but a collector tends to collect. I had a call the other day from a man from Forbes magazine. They were writing an article. I actually wanted to write about the Central America. Did they call you, Bob? And when Forbes magazine calls, you don't quite know whether they're going to try to get 14 good facts and find one bad one and twist. But they said, well, you bought some stuff in Central America. And I said, yeah, I bought one of each ingots. Well, how'd they done? Have you made money? And I said, yes. Well, could you sell them at a profit? I said, yeah, I could sell them for a nice profit. Well, why don't you do that? And I said, well, I don't want to. You're in a profit position and you don't want to sell? And I said, no, I'm collecting them. Well, but you're in a profit position. You know, so he didn't understand being a numismatist. Any other questions? Yes.
Two questions, or one story, but that everybody will enjoy. First question is, who is the worst, the hardest person to get along with these major collections?
The hardest person to get along with a major collection?
Or biggest maybe jerk, I want to say.
Well, I always, the biggest pain in the rear or something, I always have a philosophy. This is from Margot Russell of Coin World, where she said, if I sent everybody in Coin World a free $100 bill, 2% of the people would complain. They'd say I have to pay taxes on it, or it's dirt, it's soiled, So I always had a rule in mind, I still have it, that if somebody, we try to do okay, but if somebody thinks our prices are too high, or they don't like this or that, I say, well, sir, try someplace else. And I remember a number of years ago, I sent somebody a $17.94 or $17.95, and they wrote back and they said, well, this is overgraded, and this is this, and the price is too high, and he wrote a scathing letter, and I wrote back and I said, well, yes, but sir, I suggest that you take your business elsewhere because, we've sent you several things, you don't like them. So he calls me up and he says, well, I'm so-and-so, I don't remember his name. He said, you're the best dealer there is to do business with. And I said, well, we have to have some rules of engagement now, okay? If we send you more things and you don't like them, no more letters like that. He said, well, okay. Anyone else? I didn't answer your question, by the way. I'm not a politician. I don't have an immediate answer, but generally speaking, if I didn't like someone, I would just tell them I didn't want to do business with them, which I would still do today.
Yeah. Well, I was just asking about the major collectors, the major collections you mentioned.
Everybody that comes to mind, I happen to like. I mean, most people that are major collectors. I mean, it would be very hard to be a numismatist like being in this room and be at it for a number of years and be a miserable curmudgeon.
Yeah.
No, but you'd go to the convention, you wouldn't have friends, and pretty soon you'd go off and collect stamps or fish for trout instead. So I think, well, you would. So I even think if it's a convention, you meet nice people. I think it would be very hard for me to think of what I'd call a miserable collector. I'm sure there are some, and I probably could think of some, but not not the big names.
The other thing, real quick. I was doing some research for the Society of Pioneer Numismatics, and I was going to write an article. And I found this original work done by Cohen. It was just a few pages.
By who?
By Cohen, a gentleman back east. And it was on Augustus Humber. So I started to look in other places, and the Calcoin News had a Money Talks. And I opened the book, and I found the same article written by Abe Kossoff. The same identical article.
Well, one thing that happens today in the internet, and this is what any publisher would tell you, and when I do books, someone will say, oh, I have pictures of X, Y, Z, and you don't know who belongs to what, I like film history. I don't know if any of you are interested in silent films and Nickelodeon theaters, but there's a poem called Annabelle Lee, and the sun doesn't rise without reflecting in her eyes, or whatever, the beautiful Annabelle Lee. And so I remember one of the silent film things said, well, here's this beautiful poem that written in 1914 about Florence Labadie. She was a major actor. The sun never rises, but I see the eyes, and so forth. And I wrote to the person that thought this was a poem. I said, this actually is Annabelle Lee, but with Florence Labadie put in. Oh, it is? But I think today you could probably check on the internet, but there is a tremendous amount of plagiarism. I mean, I as a writer, I get plagiarized. I don't know if plagiarize is the right thing, but you get copied all the time, You read some competitor's catalog and something is verbatim, but on the other hand, I think that goes with the territory. If you write a catalog or write a book, not everybody's going to say, oh, I read this so-and-so, and so I really don't mind it unless it, got out of hand. Yes?
I heard Colonel Green